Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. And Finlay, thanks so much for joining us. And it's going to be really, everyone's looking forward to hearing about your career and about the edit of the MOORS Murders trilogy film. And so I think we'll begin, and then people can just join in as they come. Finlay,
Yeah, hello.
I've known Finlay for quite some time because we went to, as you said, we went to LCP together many moons ago, and afterwards Finn went to work at SVC and Molyneux as an onliner, and it seems got a job very quickly, and then went on to edit many things, including I'm a Celebrity, First Date, Jamie's Kitchen, Hell's Kitchen, and I'm a Celebrity over in Australia, and then more recently Netflix Breakpoint, Bill Bailey's Pub Walks, and Ambulance, Hospital, and various things that I'm sure will come up as we go. But you've had such a varied career, and it's really great for us because actually we've had many guests who have actually worked on things like some of these entertainment shows. So it's kind of great to know what it was like, going from something like that, where you've probably got quite a big team that you're working with, and how that kind of works, to then, I think, during lockdown, editing something like this, mainly, on your own. Mm-hmm. And also something that, to go from things which are largely upbeat to something which is, just quite complex and, and just disturbing, and just got a lot more to it. And I just not a lot more to it in general, but just a very different feel. So really interested to know what your journey's been like. And also I'd just like to say that when we were at LCP together, we all used to go down to the 100 Club and places like that to listen to Finlay play trumpet. And he happened to be playing trumpet this weekend at the 100 Club again. So I thought that's amazing, Finn.
It's Saturday lunchtime at the 100 Club. So
tell us, what, if anything, that I sort of just how your journey's been, really.
we were in the same year at LCP doing that film course, and survived that, and went out into the world looking for a job. Took about 6 months to get a job, really. Traipsing the streets. This is 86. And so I must have dropped off 100, 200 CVs, which is, you got to remember, we're predating the internet and mobile phones or anything like that. You had to knock on a door and get in there. And I eventually got a job at SVC, which is a big commercials house at the time, as a runner, and stayed doing that. And I was lucky because it was a good, successful company, and they were doing things like all the Wham videos, as well as Holston Pills commercials, and it all felt very glamorous and big budget. And it was big budget. There were, we were based in Film House, and there were things like The Mission were being edited upstairs, and all of that kind of stuff, feature films everywhere. So I was around Soho wheeling film cans around, and tapes to agencies and all that kind of stuff. And I lasted there until as a runner, tape assistant, got into the online editing, because really they didn't do offline editing. They did, there was a small film cutting room. So I learnt the online thing because that seemed to be the way forward. And as a sort of aside, they had a TV studio that I was also the cameraman in. So we did coming to you live from Westminster for MPs and things like that. So I ended up doing voiceovers with John Cleese and filming Michael Caine and all that kind of stuff in the early days. So it was like, wow. Anyway, you get to about 1991, there's a big sort of recession hits, and a load of people are made redundant, including me. I'd just been skiing and came back to find I was unemployed. So suddenly you freelance, and I had enough work just freelance online to keep going for a year. And then I got in with Molyneux and freelanced there almost exclusively for about a year, and then became a staff member there, again onlining. But they had one of the first Avids, and this is probably in the days when you were working a lot on Avid as one of the first Avid editors. In fact, you were demoing it for Avid, I believe, as well. Yes.
Yeah, because I did a year editing at what's it called? Spitfire. On one of the beta testing ones, and then I went to work for Avid. Yeah.
So I made a point of learning Avid, and I could see it was going to change the world. And especially when you've got clients coming in and they're giving you a floppy disk and going, right, off you go. I'll see you in 2 hours, conform that. And I just thought, well, I've been cutting stuff from scratch and editing, which is what you did in online suites in those days. But, suddenly somebody's giving you a floppy disk and saying, right, do what I've already done. That I could see the writing on the wall, and I just thought, I've got to get out of this. And I asked my girlfriend at the time. I said, "Shall we?" Because she was working in television. In fact, an aside, my wife Nikki was my girlfriend then. Had worked with Renée before because she was a producer director, and you'd cut some rough guys.
Oh yeah, we cut something together. Some of the I forgot what they're called now. Around the world things. I forgot what they're called now.
Anyway, so I said to Nikki, I said, should we go traveling for a year? Should we take a year off? And so I quit while I was there, and we went and went around the world, and it was great. And I think we saw you in Sydney, Australia that time as well, in 1996, 7. This was.
I'll tell everyone a funny thing, because there was a chunk of time when Finlay and I didn't see each other after college, and then I did this job with Nikki, and then Nikki goes, "Oh, I've met someone, and his name's Finn, Finlay." And I said, "Does he work at Molyneux by any chance?" And so it's been really fun. Yeah. But yeah, so we met up while we were away. But yeah, okay. So then you took a year off.
You're out, and we traveled all over Africa, and she had some great contacts in Africa. So I got she'd worked in Africa doing great railway journeys and things like that, and something with Benedict Allen, who's the explorer. She did from Mombasa to the mountains of the moon as a journey, and so she's she's doing all that sort of stuff, and she's great. So we're there. We do this trip, and one of the companies that she worked for gets hold of her around about Christmas and said, "Can you come back early? We've got a panorama that we want you to do." And she said, bless her, she said, "Okay, well, I'll come back and do it, but only if my boyfriend can edit it," because I didn't have much of a CV in terms of cutting films and offline, if you like. And they agreed, and that was it. So I sort of landed in the world of freelance doing a panorama, and went on from there. I remember I moved on. I think the next thing I did was The Big Story for ITV with Dermot Murnaghan, and Dorothy Byrne was the series editor, and she was quite a formidable woman. And she looked at my CV and sort of says, "Well, you've done panorama. What's that then?" and really looked down her nose at it. But they took me on, and they took me on because why? Because I had the online skills, so I could cut stuff, but I could also make sure that they got to air in time, because it was a weekly quick turnaround. And so they banked on me, and I did 15 episodes of that whole season, and that was enough to sort of move on, freelance wise, and the work started coming in, and I've been freelance ever since, I suppose.
That's brilliant, thank you, because it does show that I think if there's some strength that you've got to really kind of push it, doesn't it? The onlining thing is an advantage. It'd be interesting to know how that onlining has, since you've been offlining now for so many years, how that's kind of influenced the way that you work, possibly, or just supported it in a way. Because I think in the MOORS murders, for example, which we'll come to soon, but with all the photographs and the moving, and I don't know how involved you were with the letters and the graphics and the letters and things like that, but I would imagine it'd be a bonus. Start to talk about the MOORS murders and how that came about, and I believe you did that during lockdown.
Yeah, so that was between, let me see, started on the 24th of May 2021, and we did sort of 25 weeks. It was done in the 3 apps, um, with a week off in Mallorca on holiday. So, 3 apps in 24 weeks
Right.
in this room, on my own, doing that. It came to me through my agent, and to be honest, most of my work comes through people I've worked with now these days, and word of mouth and that kind of thing. They see what you've done. If you've done, I don't know, hospital, then they want, other blue light programs want that kind of thing. So it was unusual that somebody would come to me with something that just it clicked for me. They're doing a documentary series, and it was only going to be 2 programs about the Moors murders in their own words. And I thought that'd be interesting if we can do it right. That'd be really interesting. So I sort of, in my head, I thought I'm going to get this, and I thought I'll get at least one of them. And so I put myself out there, and agreed, because it was an acquisition and not a commission by Channel 4. And the difference is, the production company self-funds about 50% of it, them and the distributor, and Channel 4 only pays 50% of what they would normally pay for their 9 o'clock prime time hour. So there's your budget problem. And so I could see that, but I could see if it was successful that it would be worth it for me. So I agreed to temper my rate a bit and throw in the Avid, because I wanted to buy it. I mean, I'm on this iMac here, and a second screen, and my home suite, if you like. I wanted to sort of use this job to buy that and underwrite it, if you like. Yeah. So I did that, and landed the gig, and I persuaded them to let me do the 2 films in 24 weeks, because there was no sort of strong schedule. They didn't know when they were going to TX.
Yeah.
They wanted to own it anyway, so they liked the sort of idea of continuity of editor.
Yes.
So that's, and by the time we sort of started and really got going, about, I don't know, a month in, we could see it was not going to be 2 programs. It was going to be, it should be 3 if anyone's got a brain. So we need to get sign off from Channel 4, and to their credit, they bought into that and said, yeah, okay, 3 programs would work. You get this sort of trilogy, and you've got sort of, the I don't know what you would call it, the sort of, we start with a murder, that point, but then you sort of unpack that, and then you've got backstory, and then you've got the trial and to their deaths, that sort of 3-part story, which seemed to work. So that's how we proceeded.
Yeah.
It was for a company called Map TV, and they are basically a guy called Michael Atwell, who he's in his 70s now, and he basically had done this Moors story on Weekend World back in the 70s. I'm going to look at some notes here, because 1978, when Hindley was being considered for parole, he was a producer at LWT on Weekend World, and he interviewed the Home Secretary, or was it somebody on the program interviewed the Home Secretary about it, and then he sort of made a background film for that, and got to meet David Smith, who was the guy who blew the whistle on that final murder. He was the brother-in-law of Hindley, and got an exclusive interview with him, which and when he was a commissioner, he became a commissioner at Channel 5, and made a documentary in 2002, and to mark Myra Hindley's death. And he filmed this interview with what was it called, Making of a Monster. And he got a long interview with David Smith, who's this guy, and only a fraction of it was used. And he basically just kept the tapes. They were his, and because he'd filmed the interview and done the questions and everything, and put it in his archive. and we dug into that for the first person story for that final murder. And
Yeah, because it's interesting because you made the, I mean, obviously because he passed away in, I think,
by that
12
point,
months.
but yeah.
But anyway, and then so that was interesting, really, that because he is obviously throughout the whole the three parts, isn't he? And yeah, and then so you had so elements wise, then you had few interviews.
You had his interviews. He was present for the final murder, and you know, was a witness in the case. We had Janie Jones, who had sort of 40 years of letters, and I don't know if any of you know the Clash, but there's a song called Janie Jones, which is about her. She used to hang out with the Clash in the 70s. She did some prison time for being a madam in Notting Hill, right? So she's a bit sort of, she's in her 80s now, and she for this series she came back because she was in she in the first one, yeah, in the Weekend World in 78. So she'd met Michael then, and she came back to him 40 years later and said, I've got 40 years worth of letters from, because she'd been a cellmate of Myra Hindley for a long time. Rumours of them being lovers, but she wrote when she got out with Hindley for a long time until they irrevocably sort of fell out, and then she sort of turned and flipped and started writing to Brady in jail, and had many years of correspondence with him until his death, and she kept it all. She's quite a sort of conniving, clever person. If you've watched any of the programs, you'll see she was on the Russell Harty show about this being this Notting Hill madam, and she was of that time, shameless, and you could see that she obviously had plotted this forever and kept this load of letters which we used to bring these characters to life, because obviously they're both long dead, and there's no film at all of them. There's hardly any spoken word. The only thing is the sort of the court tape, or the tape of the murder potentially of Leslie Ann Downey, which was used as evidence in the court case. Otherwise, there's nothing else of them, that you can see. Maybe a helicopter shot when they were walking on the moors trying to find the other bodies that you'd remember from the news, but nothing else. So we tried to bring them to life with using these letters. That was one element of it, so that you've got veracity there.
So you've got the graphics with that.
We revoiced the letters, and Steve Bond, who did all of the graphics for this, because again, you're working to a budget. We found Steve, and he had multi-skills. He's an editor, but he also directs, but he knows Photoshop, and he knows After Effects and Premiere, and he basically took on the role of the graphics on this. And so he did the letters, and he did all the stills, because an awful lot of those were ripped off the internet, and he placed them in templates and made them all have a look, got them up to high definition, even though they were rubbish old photographs, made them all sort of homogenous is the word, isn't it? So they all fitted in a style. And the other thing that he did was he was involved in the AI reanimation of those sort of iconic mugshots that we used a lot through there. Now, the evolution of that idea was this is what, 2021. We're in the early days of AI to most of us. My sister sent me a photograph or a little mov of my grandfather in his RAF uniform, smiling away, and I knew there was no film of my grandfather, and he's long dead. He's smiling away, he blinks, and just tilts his head, and it was on a website called myheritage.com, so where you could sort of find tributes of dead relatives, if you like. And I thought that would work. It was just like a little sort of eureka moment, and so I said, why don't we try doing this with the MOORS mugshots if there's no moving footage of them at all, nothing. And so Steve didn't get it at first, and he started sort of rotoscoping them and animating the stills himself, and it looked rotoscoped. It looked like a cartoony. I said, "No, look at this," and then I found an iPhone app that does the same. Talking Heads, it's called, and I did the same with Hindley and Brady, and I sent it to the producers and to him, and they just went, "Yeah, that's it, bingo," and we found out a third-party supplier of that AI, and rinsed it to death, I suppose, in the 3 programs, because they, you just to punctuate or to give them that presence of being alive on screen when there's nothing else that you could really use. So that's the story of. I mean, here we are with AI now, and I texted Steve the other day, and said, because we were at the True Crime Awards for this series, and it was the first time all of us had been in a room together. 2 months back, I think it was, and we all had a glass of wine, and it was, very interesting. Professor David Wilson and all these other lots there, and they were doing all these crime things. And he showed me. He said, "Right, look at this for where AI is at now," and it was he's got a thing called. It's called Mid Journey, and it's an AI app that you use through Discord. And basically, through text, you can say, "Right, I want a still photograph of a room. It's 1940. It's in Germany. The wallpaper's green. There's a blonde woman in there wearing a pink dress, and there's a dog at her feet." And it will just produce that photograph, photoreal. It's unbelievable. I mean, you wouldn't know that it wasn't a photograph. It can be lit from a window, and you can just tell it these things, and it makes it. And this is going to fundamentally change our world. I was just thinking about the Bill Bailey thing that I just finished. I thought, we were having real trouble clearing Shaun Ryder performing at Glastonbury, because it was going to be enormously expensive, and we wanted to use some archive of that. And I just said to the producer, I said, "What about if we just get an AI to do it?" And it would do it. I mean, it'd be sort of stylized, but it would do it. Now, who owns the copyright to that? If Shaun Ryder's all right with us using his likeness, and the rest of it is created digitally from the internet, everything that it samples, who owns the copyright? There's a conundrum, and that's going to start happening from now onwards. I'm doing something where at the moment I've got an NDA, so I can't tell you what I'm doing just now, but it's one of the interviewees doesn't say the name of a person we want to name check throughout, and I don't think we can get a pickup with him. But if I take a sample of his voice for 30 seconds, a minute, whatever, and put it in there and write this name out, I think, we haven't done it yet, but I think I'll be able to get him to say the name, and then I can drop that in. Is that breaking the rules?
I guess you have to ask him, don't you?
Well, I think as long as he's okay with us, doing that, as long as you don't breach trust, but where's the line? And that's the sort of dilemmas going forward that we face with AI.
That's the thing. I think so that's why it's going to be, well, it is so important that people have got the experience and understand that when you are, what lines you are.
Yeah, well, I imagine at the Beeb,
that they can have the conversation.
At the Beeb, you'd never do that. But if you're working for Netflix, then they're much more open to sort of storytelling. Let's call it that in inverted commas.
I don't know. I was working on something recently where there was an edit that there was a cut that another editor had done, and I thought there was something sort of funny about it, and I sort of dissected it, and I just realised it wasn't really the true moment that it was saying that it was. So I just spoke to the execs, and it's got to go. But it is that thing of just knowing when something just is off.
Yeah, you've got to have a nose for fakery. You've got to know when stuff is fake, and I think you get that through watching your rushes. When people are acting or not being, certainly in the documentary world or current affairs or some. Do you know what I mean? you really get a nose for whether people are genuine or not, or whether you're being hoodwinked or there's an agenda.
Yeah.
But I think AI sort of blurs that and takes it onto another level. And you can use it for good, or you can use it nefariously, can't you?
Thank you. Okay, so let's have. I just wanted to. Well, let me just see if there's any questions. There's no. I don't think there's any questions, but if I'm missing anything, jump in. So yeah, I just think the possibilities with the AI are brilliant as well. But it's just, like you say, I mean, the idea of creating the photographs, I mean, I'm presuming there's like, fantastic looks that you can get with that. But it's just how you use them and whether you have to save
by AI, but the person in the picture has to give their permission for their image to be used, surely.
Talking about the Moors, molars and the elements. So there's the interviews, there was aerials of the Moors.
They had one day of shooting aerials on the Moors, one day, that's it.
Okay. Oh, okay. And then there was some drama reconstructions of them going into the cells or to have their mugshots.
Yep.
There was also archive of the time, sort of in Glasgow and different things. There were the stills. So how did you communicate with the other people who were making it with you, because you were you were on your own?
There was Michael and his partner Douglas, who are the co-producers on this. Their company did it. So Michael, with his experience of current affairs, gave me paper edits for so script. It involved quite old-fashioned script, commentary, interview. And then I was left to sort of put flesh on the bones of that. Once we've got, guide voiceover, interviews, put some pictures down, find some music, and crack on. And so they had always wanted to make it feel of the time, and they had a very good deal with Getty, where we could use anything from Getty, and remember, Getty also includes all the early newsreels from BBC, ITN, ITV, regional. You can access all of that through Getty. So it was a one-stop shop for that. But also I was digging into, I was trying to take a leaf out of Adam Curtis' book, if you like, and just use found archive to evoke a mood, a moment, or a backdrop, or a place, or whatever it is, of the time. So my skills in learning how to become an archive researcher, if you like, evolved quite quickly over that period, because Getty's massive. I mean, there's 100 years of archives there that you can dig into. You soon find out how you need to sort of find the nuance in your keyword search and narrow it down to a time period, and whether you want it to be aerial, wide, all these things. And so I spent days and probably weeks finding stuff that would, I just reviewed the first program, and one of the first scenes is he's in the murder scene, and sitting down and having a cup of tea. So how do you we've got an interview, how do you evoke him having a cup of tea? So I found various tea pouring, and there's some really creative stuff, but I wanted predominantly for it to be of the time, on film, to look like you were in that world. There's plenty of modern high definition video of that. Who wants that? You want to be in the moment. So I was quite strict with that, and I love the sort of mishmash of, I wasn't too worried about cutting between black and white and colour and those kind of things. So it became a kind of collage, if you like, a montage of evoking what you're hearing this guy tell you the scene is. And then, the veracity comes from the stills, which are the court evidence of the murder scene, for example. Where's a dead body lying who's had his head smashed in with an axe, and that's, and it was touch and go.
Yeah, there was a photograph of that, wasn't there?
Yeah, it was touch and go whether we showed that, for taste reasons, but it is in the public domain. It's a murder scene, and it was evidence. It was the same with, I spoke to Douglas, the producer, about. I said, "What? Can you remind me why didn't we use Myra Hindley's voice, because it exists on that tape?" But if you think of it, it's basically, you know, a sicko torture of a child. To use it just goes beyond. I don't think Channel 4 would ever broadcast it, and I don't think we'd want to do that. You've got to remember, and that's the sort of, at the end of the day, these, you know, these kids, they were all murdered by these sick, Britain's worst paedophile serial killers, weren't they? You know, and which is why, you know, one of the last things I cut in the 3 programs was the end sort of montage with in Paradisum, with the Requiem music and just pictures of the Moors, and you know, the fact that they had never found the final body, you know, as an endpoint, and just with the gravestones, and I just felt it had to be really respectful and you know, introspective, if you like, of that story, and it wasn't about this salacious murders and these 2 notorious killers. It was really, in the end, it was about some poor children that had been, you know, had their lives ended. You know.
Yeah, there's the archive of the mothers, and
when I remember when I cut it, and I was starting to get goosebumps when, you know, when you do something and then you watch it back, you sit and watch it, and you're on your own, and I start to get, I'm getting them now. You get goosebumps, you know, watching it and think, Christ, that's powerful. And I sent it to the producers, and they both phoned me up on speaker and said, we're both in tears. I can't, you know, this is hardened producers. He's done that story this was the 4th time, or 3rd time, sorry. You know what I mean? But it clearly, that's the power of what we can do if it really works.
It must have been really difficult to choose the music, because the music, well, I don't know, was it? Because I really liked listening to the music and thinking, oh yeah, you know.
Again, starting point, I suppose, was we're driven by budget, aren't we? So, you know, it has to be library, but there's a wealth of great library out there, and
Yeah.
and you know, one of my favourite places is Universal, because they have quite a broad church of all kinds of music. And so I was looking for, I watched a bunch of true crime and sort of got and I was trying to give it a sort of Scandinavian noir feel on the music side, and just use layers of music and sort of more modern voices, and so not so much music as tonality, but also, you know, you find something like I think in Paradisum, which is it Mozart? I can't remember who composed it. It's a classical piece. Found it, you know, that's Audio Networks. So all the music is library, but hopefully it doesn't sound like library all the time.
I don't think so. I mean, I think these days there's so many sort of composers write for the libraries now, or the libraries will write things for you, and also there's just a lot of so much. It's just a great choice now in the libraries, depending on who you choose. So did you search all the music, or did you ask for any research?
No. So budget dictated that Michael and Douglas living in Chipping Norton, and they were up there, sending me paper edits and that kind of thing. But essentially, there was no edit producer. There was me, and they bought into me because of, you know, I was quite experienced, I suppose, and they felt they could trust me to do that, and that was borne out in the fact that they, you know, continued to feel that way. But, you know, it was left to me again to get this music through this machine here, you know, audition it, decide what we had. Now I downloaded, you know, 1,000+ tracks from Universal Audio Networks and various other libraries, and just sort of built it from there. And I also used Universal for sound effects, because they have you know, once you've got an account with Universal, there is a sound effects portal as well, and you can get in there and because I don't have a, you know, a shed load of sound effects here, and that's one of the things I've noticed over the past few years is, you know, if you're working in a facility or somewhere else, often now they have a good amount of sound effects, and
Yeah.
they never used to, and you never used to have the chance to sort of build that soundscape that
Yeah.
I did build on this, and got sort of stuck into it. And often with television, I mean, very different to feature films or drama, factual documentary television. They don't spend a lot of money on in terms of foleying effects or pulling in effects and spot effects and all that kind of stuff. They don't have the
Mm.
budget all the time, and so it's a sort of unloved area, if you like. And you
Mm.
know, more now, I tend to sort of try and do that Bill Bailey thing that I've just done. I was pulling in loads of effects and to create your segues between scenes because this is two blokes walking. That's what that series is about. You're in nature and you can just breathe a moment and enjoy the sound of nature. It doesn't have to be music all the time. It can be natural. The natural world is quite sort of captivating, isn't it? As a soundscape, it really works.
You really put a lot into it yourself, and in terms of all of those different layers, not leaving that to someone
Definitely,
else. You really,
definitely. Yeah, I pushed myself definitely.
yeah.
I needed to learn these skills, so I learned how to access and find and do the technical bit of downloading an archive from Getty through their portal. So that in the end, I got the stuff. I was downloading stuff at full res and making sure that it would work for the online. The online was done in a place called the Hall up in Chipping Norton, and they were really helpful ingesting lots of stuff at the early stage. But through the offline stage, I would download all my rough archive screeners myself, and the same with the music. I made sure that I learned how to do that, and I improved my skills finding music, which was good. One of the other things, and we chatted about this before today, was first time I made sure that I had transcripts of all the interviews that we had, and I had them prepped, and so they were trinted or transcribed properly. I got them, made them into text files, and imported them into the Avid using ScriptSync, and married it up with the 2-camera interview shoots for the groups, and it was all there. And it's so, and there's plenty of resources online to find about how you use ScriptSync. The Americans are way ahead on it, but where it really worked for me was quickly finding material using the scripts, and you can just word search and stuff. But the other thing is, often people don't find the end of a sentence. They don't say the word with the right intonation or a breath or anything like that. We're chopping people's sentences up, and you can search that last word or two, put a full stop on it, search through the scripts of that interview, and find three other times when the person says the same word but finishes a sentence, and you can chop that word, put it at the end of the sentence, and you've made it. You've made your thing sound real, and I'm doing that more and more. It just really works.
So when you use ScriptSync, how much sort of prep time does it take?
So if you've got, so what I would, so on Bill Bailey, the interviews were not going to be transcribed, and I said, no, come, let's do it. So I made sure that I made the MOVs, so I got the interviews, put them together, exported the MOVs with in timecode and stuff, so we got a reference. As MP4s, they go off to Trint, you can upload them. The Trint, you can check that online and correct it where it's wrong, because it's an AI, it's not a person, but it's pretty quick. It does it, a 30-minute interview will be transcribed in 15 minutes. And then you can start reviewing it, and whilst you're reviewing it, you can correct things, and it's playing through the interview on your screen as a MOV whilst you're correcting it. So you do that. You can make sure it's the names are right and stuff. Download a Word file of the interview, make it to the text file, and put it into your Avid, and then marry it up with your offline grouped interview. Often these things, they were filming 2 cameras, but there's also separate sound polywabs, which is quite tricky, because if you match frame back to the source, if you've not sorted it so the group's there and the sound is there and it's all one, then you end up matching back to a WAV file, and the other things are separate, and it's a pain. It's a pain. So going through those steps, it takes a couple of, like half a day. I did all the interviews for one film. Alan Davies and Bill Bailey. They had interviews day 1, 2, and 3, and a final interview. So I managed to do all that. And the producer I was working with, who I've worked with many times, was quite reticent to do it. He didn't want to waste the time. He said, "Oh, look, I can just do this. I've got it here." And I said, "Indulge me. Give me half a day or a couple of hours." I stretched to half a day, and we did it. And by the end of the edit, where I'd cut the 4 films for him, he was convinced. Converted. He says, it's definitely the way forward. Saves you time. It doesn't save you time at the start of the edit. It costs you time, but to change things and to find stuff to make people speak normally and finish their sentences and re-edit and find alternatives and things like that. It's really versatile.
That's brilliant. Yeah. No, it sounds really worth it. And Alan, would you like to ask your question?
Well, I'll just read the question. Despite the repetition of the moving mugshots, every time they were edited in, it was relevant and eerily effective. How much of that power came from the commentary suggesting our emotional response to the images, or was it just the images themselves?
I think it is in the writing. I mean, I think Michael writes commentary really well. He's got a wealth of experience of doing that sort of thing, and he's not waffly wordy. He's his first draft was usually the one that we went with. It was pretty good, unless we were too long. And the repetition of the shots. Steve, the graphics guy, did many different iterations of those mugshots just subtly different, with different backdrops, different framings, I mean, even the reconstruction stuff. You could cut to the mugshot at the end and they would virtually match. He did the sort of treatment on the reconstruction, because it was quite bald and video before that. He messed it up enough for it to feel stylized and not shonky, because it was literally a couple of actors and half a day in a studio to do that. So I suppose I was editing the pictures and the reactions of the eyes looking up, because that's the moment that catches you, isn't it? When they're looking down like that and they just look up.
Yeah.
It's really eerie and quite captivating but unsettling. And there was an awful lot of sort of Twitter. I followed Twitter when the first program went out, on transmission, and I started doing that when I was working on a hospital, just because it was really life affirming and made you feel wonderful as an editor that you're pulling these strings of emotions in people, telling these stories of these people in the health service, and under their most vulnerable, and people are tweeting on in real time. Oh my God, that's so wonderful! All these things, and so I followed Twitter for this, and that was the thing that really created the most noise, if you like, in that people were going, "It's disgusting that they've brought these things to life, these animals to life, these monsters," and that was kind of the point. That was kind of the point. I thought, of course you're going to get that. You make a program about these people, you're going to get people that react like that. But also you have to consider the families of the children, many of whom are not alive any longer. But you still have to consider the effect on them. And so I sort of moderated it with that in mind, but I was trying to create dramatic moments to punctuate, just like you said, I suppose.
Thank you, because there was a sting that you used on most of those, wasn't there? I think it was the same one.
End of parts. We decided to sort of go to that. That's your icon. isn't it? And I use the same the same music, I think, for each in and out, and just to give it, make it homogenous again, give it some identity.
Also, those images are so well known to people of a certain generation that any kind of change, I felt that looking at Myra as much as I did over the 3 episodes sort of deepened my emotional response to that picture, and it's only one picture. Yeah. Obviously, the movements are going to help, but she's just got that. God, if you just said this is a picture of a woman who just bought a loaf of bread, you'd say fine. But Laurie Anderson did a documentary about faces about 15 years ago, and she put 25 faces up on screen and said, is there anything, that you can say about these particular faces? And you look at it and you go, God, they all look so normal and so relatively dull and whatever. Well, they were all serial killers.
Yeah.
And it was just that point of the normality, what do they call it? The banality of evil. But I just found that I actually look forward to coming back to those faces. It was a very weird thing.
I mean, they're black and white, mug shots. They both look kind of sullen and belligerent, I think, which is what you get from most mug shots. Look at Donald Trump, for example. But so we decided to colorize them to make them more real, and then the movement helps, but just subtle. And there's no way that I mean, maybe now if you had a sample of their voice, you could make them say stuff, but I don't think that would be editorially where we'd want to go with that. So it was just enough to give them that sort of brooding presence. Yeah. That was what we were after.
Nice. On the subject of AI, you must look up David Attenborough Destroys Disney on YouTube.
Okay.
Because the AI voice is not old Attenborough, it's classic Attenborough, so it's AI. But it is. You sit there for 5 minutes thinking, is it? No, it's.
So where do we go in a world where potentially our news, news on the BBC or other outlets is being affected? I mean, I know my wife worked for Reuters for quite a long time, and all their stills and everything, there's no manipulation, no Photoshop, nothing. If it has a Reuters banner on it, it's not been manipulated, and the BBC is suffering a little bit from.
Yeah, but the first thing you can do is put a Reuters thing on it. Yeah. In Photoshop. I mean, there's got to be other ways. We have to find other technical ways to protect ourselves from all this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I saw a video the other day where there's a producer and he's talking to us, and he's explaining the problems with AI and where it's at the moment. And he says, so this is all happening, and I can change my face into the sound recordist or the cameraman. It happens whilst he's talking. Right. It's in sync, and the voices change. And then about 3 minutes in, he says, "But you wouldn't know that." And I was, admittedly, it was on my phone, but it looked pretty. You can normally tell CGI and that kind of thing. I couldn't tell. And then he says 3 minutes in, and by the way, this isn't actually my voice at all. It's all been generated by an AI from a sample that I gave earlier. And so nothing you've watched so far is real.
Yeah, I know. Where do we go?
Yeah. There you go.
I don't want to dominate the questions, but I'll invite other people to come in. But there is something else I do want to ask, and it's in the chat. So
okay, so that's what the sort of a certain generation.
Yeah, just go on.
Okay, I'm sort of touching on that. Renee and I talked about it. It's like one of those. This was one of these sort of moments, like the Kennedy assassination or landing on the moon. Whereas, as a child in that time, you remember, or even, England winning the World Cup in '66. I was 2 and a bit, but the reason I remember is I was a page boy wearing a kilt, and it was my uncle's wedding. I'm 2 and a half, and I remember that the wedding sort of stopped and everyone watched it my family is Scottish, in case you didn't know, and we were in Edinburgh, and of course, who were they cheering for? I don't remember that, but I was, I grew up in Essex for the most part, so I was certainly cheering for England. But, and it took. I saw him a couple of weeks back, and it took him to remind me of that moment. It's just flashes back into your head, and you think, oh yeah, I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. I remember we weren't allowed out in the evenings, on our bikes. We were, kids were had a stroke, it was like the end of the age of innocence for children of a certain age, I think. And they remain Britain's most notorious serial killers, paedophiles, and kind of sex weirdos. I mean, and that was one of the things that we could dig into in this program more. I think than because we're of a different age. The programs in the sort of 70s or the noughties even didn't really go into that sort of what drove them. Do you know what I mean? That sort of paedophilia, kind of weird, control-y darkness. So I think we touched on that more and kind of put it in some sort of context.
Yeah.
It was good in the way the letters, people talked about the letters. It was fascinating, wasn't it? When they sort of just tried to work out, what they were, that they knew these letters weren't just to the person they were writing it to, that we'd all be.
Well, I think Janie Jones was always angling to get under the skin of certainly Brady and get him to admit that, his part in it, because he never ever admitted his part in it, I think. And he certainly took to his grave where they buried the last body. He was that sort of narcissist. Was David Wilson calls him a sort of obsessive narcissistic personality disorder or something like that. He's a psycho, proper psycho, and he wants to retain whatever control he can. He'll keep that, and he took it to his grave. I mean, thoroughly nasty.
What was it like being so going from things like Jamie's Kitchen and those kind of, I know you didn't, because I know you've done a lot of things in between which are quite tough, and I'm sure you see things that the other people watching the film don't see, and the programs, and I was just wondering what it was like, that difference between working on those kinds of films to working on something on your own that is so dark and getting into their world. Because like Alan's just said that he watched the 3 episodes. I had watched it before, but I watched it between yesterday and today. I watched the 3 episodes. You are left with a kind of heaviness.
Maybe I've just got such a bright personality. I don't know. I didn't want to get changed by it. Do you know what I mean? I didn't want it to darken my soul or heart. And so I looked on it very much as a sort of historical thing. I still can't believe that they're quite so sort of nasty and horrible. But I mean, when I was working for the BBC out of White City for about a year, I was doing sort of terrorist documentaries and that kind of thing. And one of the things, excuse me, that came to mind with your question about this was, I got one of those embargoed beheading videos for the project. We were had to show it, and it was one of the American journalists in an orange jumpsuit, and they're going to cut his head off, and it's too abhorrent to watch or even consider, I think. And so I thought, well, if I watch this, it's forever going to be in there in my mind's eye. I'll close my eyes and I'll be able to see it. Yeah, and I don't want
I've been there.
I don't. Yeah, well,
and hear it.
I devised before I even looked at the tape. It's got all the big red banners on it and everything, and embargoed and all that stuff. And I just thought, right, I got to the first frame of it, and I turned the sound down. I got a filter. I put it on, made it a different sequence. I got a filter, made it black and white, and I blurred the whole centre of it. And I thought, because we're never going to. I don't want to watch it. We're never going to show beyond the moment of someone going like that, and that would be it at the very most. Really, it's all the preamble that you want. You don't want anything from that point on, and I don't want it to pollute my mind. I don't want to be made less by that. So that's what I did, and I'd advise anyone else that ever gets to, that kind of stuff. That's too grim. I recently, just January, I did a blue light thing about surgeons and A&E. It was for Channel was for Channel 5, strangely, and they seem to like things much more graphic and much more full of detail and all not gratuitous, but they want you to be in there and all this. And there was some of the stuff that I had to watch for that. You know, people in an operating theatre having their jaw cut out. You know, they basically cut your throat, lift up your face, take your jaw out, and make a new one out of printed out of plastic or whatever. It's so gruesome. I mean, there you are. I can see that now. I saw the rushes. Yeah, I can see it. And so, but at least that's a sort of reconstructive surgery for someone and saving their life. So you can sort of live with that, if you like. I don't want to see people getting their heads cut off or anything. You know, people getting shot or any of that stuff. You know, none of it. Bit of aftermath in a program making world, I can live with. You know, telling the story of 2 paedophile serial killers, I can live with, as long as I don't have to see tons of dead bodies and stuff. The darkness there, I'll never understand how one human can do that to another. You know, that's beyond my comprehension. But it happens, and so, you know, we're telling the story of that.
Ben is asking, Ben Elliot, I've managed to catch the first half of Moore's Murders and find it incredibly moving and interesting. It made me feel like I was almost watching a drama. How was the decision made in terms of drama against realism, both ethically, entertainment-wise, and artistically?
Oh, ethically and entertainment-wise. I mean, we're making a programme for Channel 4 and the wider world in which, just on that, it's sold now in lots of territories. You can get it on Apple TV and Amazon Prime and Canal Plus in French and all that. So it needs to be, I mean, it needs to be Reithian, doesn't it? It needs to be informative and educational and entertaining. And in terms of tone, I think we got that right. We weren't trying to sensationalize. It was the story in their own words, you know, taken from their letters and people that were there, you know, for 90% of it. I think you've got your experts, you know, crime or journalists or whatever. And then in terms of drama and realism, there's a little bit of reconstruction. Fine. The way I tried to edit the archive, like I've said, is I tried to, and I've not done drama, but I've watched plenty of it. Do you know what I mean? We're all experts on television in that we've grown up with it and watched drama and watched documentaries, and we've watched it from age 0. And so I was trying to edit it and tell the story like you would a drama, and more that's kind of, certainly with the streamers, you know, that's their shtick. That's what they want. They want, you know, their feature docs told like a drama, and they found some bloody clever ways of doing it. You know, I'm continually amazed by how they write it. But what they're doing is they're getting clever script writers or storytellers or drama people to write, okay, here's the story of this, you know, documentary I'm going to make. Write it as a drama. How would you do it? And you know, power to their elbow. The more of that, the better. I think it's great that you can tell a real story, a documentary with veracity, using the people that were in it, but using drama storytelling, if you like, dramatic. You know, in that you write it, and you don't need to always start at the beginning and finish at the end. You can start at the end and meander around the middle and you know, end at the end again, if you like. That kind of thing, like Pulp Fiction.
Thank you, Ben. I was just thinking while you were saying that, so the new interviews, were they shot in a style to sort of match the old ones? I hadn't really.
So the only old interview was David Smith, which was from 2002, Digibeta one camera, I think, and all the new interviews were two cameras, one cameraman, often the case now, but they all had to sort of look similar, and so that was down to Doug, the cameraman, that did all that, and I just, I didn't really have any input on that element of the production, if you like.
Yeah, and I've got to ask, were there any women involved in this in this film?
Well,
besides the interviewees, obviously you had to interview.
Well, Janie Jones, who owns the letters,
yes,
who's still alive. She must be about 82. Check out the Clash song about Janie Jones. And
yeah.
I digress again, but talking about archive, I managed to find her in Getty Archive in Newsreel, where she was being doorstepped outside a court for that sort of madam thing that she went to jail for in the end. And it was great, but all of the, what they called, all the metadata, or the words, words associated with it, there's no Janie Jones or anything like that. I just managed to find her by looking exhaustively, and that was like, oh my God, there she is in that moment. And there was no real news of her because it was local, if you like. Women, there were a couple of journalists. One of the journalists she's on GB News these days, anchoring stuff, but she was the editor of The Guardian in Manchester at the time. So she's interviewed, and there's an expert criminologist, who's another woman. In terms,
The production team, just wondering. I was just curious.
Joanna, we've got Michael and Douglas, who are the producers, who are actually a couple, and have been for a long time. Douglas was in advertising, and he sort of took on the director role, and Michael is the seasoned producer. There was me, there was Steve, and Joanna was the production manager that sort of, again, just pulled it all together and made it work. And on screen, I think
quite a lot of female voices.
I think one of the things about this story is that the reason people remember it so much is because it's usually men that are violent. It's usually men that are the monsters, and it's usually men that are, the murderers. They go out to war, they kill people, and all that. Men are rapists and all that kind of thing. That's kind of historically from before the Vikings. But this was really the first time in sort of popular culture that a woman had was kind of seen as this monster that was killing children, or facilitating the killing of these children. And that was the single biggest change, and I think that's the thing that made. There's always been psycho men, but she was the first big psycho woman, I think, if you like, in popular culture. So that's just my read on it. I don't claim to be the only, the expert on that at all.
Thanks, Finn. I was just looking at the time because we've gone 8 minutes over, so I apologise for not flagging that up earlier. Have you got a couple more minutes?
Yeah,
yes.
I can carry on.
Thank you. Because I just wanted to ask about Alan's question about making it more accessible to, is there any way that you thought of to make the story, ways of making the story more accessible to people who weren't like us, born around that time or into that?
I think we tried to tell the story from a no knowledge point of view. So if you knew nothing about it, this had to cover everything, which is why it covers Brady's childhood in Glasgow and all these things. You've got to set them up as real people. They're not just these. Because I only knew them as murderers from my childhood when they were going to jail and that point. So they obviously lived a life before that, and so we tried to tell the complete story for both of them as much as possible from cradle to grave almost. And accepting that a certain generation, i.e. people similar age to me and older, will know it, and people below that age will not. So we had to bear that in mind, that you can't assume that kind of knowledge.
Mm. But what was so great, when William Goldman was starting to write the screenplay to All the President's Men, he figured out all the stuff that people didn't know. Like the burglars had actually tried to break in twice before. It was the third time they actually managed to get into Watergate. And what was so good about the three-parter was that I didn't know how you search a moor en masse. And when I told my wife that you stick a stick in and then you smell it to see if you could smell human remains, she just went, ah, God. It was like that kind of detail was the thing that made the whole thing sing. It was like, oh, what am I going to find out about now? You know, the Arthur Koestler Award goes to Myra Hindley. It's like, are you kidding me? You know?
Yeah, I mean again, you know, in terms of exclusives, you know, nobody's heard her voice really. Although if you search the internet, you can probably find that recording of the Leslie Ann Downey torture. But
God,
there we are. Janie Jones again kept copies of those recordings. That's where we sourced that stuff, and you know, she's singing Joan Baez in a prison, and actually she's got not a bad voice from a musician's point of view. It's not a bad voice. She sings all right. I don't know who the guitar is, but it again, you put that face to that voice, or the story to that voice, and it just goes very dark and kind of weird. And it's an exclusive that they liked. Will Rosen at Channel 4, the sort of commissioning editor, if you like. I mean, in that Channel 4, so it's an acquisition. So they haven't commissioned it, but we've got a commissioning editor. So he wants to give us notes, and he has, you know, 2 rounds of viewings and then a fine cut. The good thing about acquisitions is you know, Michael and Douglas and I could get a little bit more precious and go, no, I don't agree with you there. We're not going to change that because you've not paid for it all. We've got 50% of the input, and I mean, one big difference, you know, there's lots of little differences, but he worked collaboratively with us. Let's not get it wrong, but he was very good. But the one big difference was, I think one of the episodes starts with an extreme close up of an eye, and I was really sort of, and it just stares at you and then blinks, and that was I really liked that, and it was homage to Blade Runner for me, you know. But he didn't like it. He thought it was too self-conscious, and so he wanted to start with a swooping shot of the Moors, which was fine, and we did that for the Channel 4 version. But the international version, if you watch on I don't know, Apple or Amazon Prime or whatever, hopefully, because I haven't seen it, there will be this lovely big eye, which is just an extreme close-up of an eye that I found on Getty. You know, trying staring into someone's soul kind of idea. You know, it's all metaphors, isn't it? And that's what I was looking for. I'd think about, okay, what's this bit of the story about? And think of metaphors, and then I'd search on Getty for stuff that tick those boxes, if you like, and to find things that triggered me visually to help build that story.
Nice.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any more questions for Finlay?
I've got 1 million, but I'm being respectful.
Okay. Well, do you want to ask one more, Alan? No? Okay.
Well, yeah, I exaggerated with 1 million. But no, I wanted to get into the whole AI thing, but I think that's just opening a can of worms, which I don't think we need to do now. Perhaps Revis and I can, you know, get together and talk about the AI situation.
Yeah,
because
I think, you know, you could do a whole, you know, chat about AI and its impact where we are now, where we were 2 years ago, but where we're going as well. I mean, it's going to fundamentally shift things like trust, creativity, copyright. What you know, if I can generate someone saying the words I want, how do I need them or not? And that's what isn't that what this Hollywood actor strike is in part about?
Yeah, you can my image, and you know. Anyway, I've written about it in the next first frame, a kind of light way of writing about it, but it was because Photoshop, as you probably know now, you can generate images from their library by just pressing buttons.
Well,
So,
the other thing that just sprang to mind when you're saying that is, you know, my use of ScriptSync. Producer today was giving me this thing, and you know, in Premiere now, you can just take your text. If you've done the ScriptSync steps that I would do, you can just, you know, press one button, and there's your forever linked, you know, transcript paper edit down on a timeline. It's there. I spent all day today doing that from a paper edit that we'd shared. But you know, in a year's time or 3 months' time, or if you do it on Premiere, I think you can do it now. You know, it's just there. Boom.
yeah,
Where's your thinking time? Where's your thinking time?
yeah, exactly.
I guess I've got one really quick question, last question. Did you do it in the 24 weeks, or did you have extra time for 3 episodes? Oh, well done.
I was trying to find out initially, because you know I said it was commissioned as 2 and it was eventually 3. I think it was commissioned as it was going to be 16 weeks, so they had 8 weeks per episode. Yeah, and so I cut them all, and they were all live in the Avid. You know, we did 1 first, then moved on to 2, did 2, did tweaks on 1, and did 3, and we had them all as offlines that could, and we could rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit if we found by the end of the road that you know we needed to move. And I don't recall that we did that very much, but we must have done a little bit of it. It was 24 weeks of editing between 24th of May and 12th of November. So if you look in your diaries, that there's actually 1 week in the middle that I had off and went to Mallorca with the family. But
thank you. Right. So Revis. Oh, okay. Abby 2023.8 introduces more ScriptSync AI features.
Yeah,
okay. There's a link. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, thank you. Well, so I think it's for me to say on behalf of all of us, Finlay, thanks so much for sharing so much of your career and your insights and ways of working with us. It's been brilliant, and although we've known each other a long time, we've never spent this amount of time talking about your work, sadly. So it's been really brilliant.
No one's been interested before now.
Thank you, and you know, congratulations for your nomination for the Cut Above Award and the other nomination. I know it got at least one more nomination, and yeah, wish you great luck going forward. And thanks. And maybe you can come back when we do an AI session, because it sounds like we probably will do. I'll be get a few people to, you know, talk about that. It'd be great. Well, thanks very much, everyone. And let's stop the recording, Ray.
Yes.